Donald Trump is a fascist, and I'm going to explain to you why by going through all 14 characteristics of fascism and explaining why Donald Trump adheres to each one. This is part two, which took me forever to put together because there are so many damn examples, because the second characteristic of fascism is disdain for human rights. This is nowhere near all of them, but I decided I'm just going to try to rattle through as many examples as possible and hopefully cover a variety of areas. Starting off in 2017, he signed the first version of his Muslim ban, which discriminated against Muslims and banned refugees, and he continued to expand upon this ban throughout his first term. His administration separated over 5,500 children and their families with a zero tolerance policy. He instated the Remain in Mexico Act in 2019, which forces refugees to stay in the country that they're trying to seek refuge from while their claims are being processed, which also makes it more difficult for them to get proper representation in court. In August of 2019, the acting Homeland Security Secretary announced that they were moving forward with new rules to end the Flores Settlement Agreement, which ensured constitutional protections for children in immigrant detention facilities. Without those protections, the government can hold immigrant children in prison-like conditions indefinitely with no mandate for appropriate care for them. In December of 2020, the DHS and the DOJ finalized new rules that added extra hurdles for people trying to claim asylum and limits on who can qualify for protection, which included denying asylum to people who are facing gender prosecution in their home country. As soon as he took office this January, he canceled thousands of asylum appointments at the Texas border, leaving people seeking legal entry stranded and without help. He's deported people with no due process and detained people who were coming to their routine ICE check-ins or interviews related to obtaining their legal status. In April of 2019, the Department of Housing and Urban Development proposed a rule, which was later published, seeking to restrict housing assistance for families with mixed citizenship status, which by their own analysis would lead to 55,000 children becoming temporarily homeless. Immigrant children who traveled here without immediate family members now face oftentimes abusive immigration detention and deportation without access to a lawyer, after the administration cut funding for a refugee resettlement program that offered legal representation services. Dozens of people from Venezuela have been placed in expedited removal proceedings where they'll be deported to Guantanamo Bay, where they face oftentimes abusive treatment and also have limited access to legal counsel. And immigrants in detention will have less access to information about representing themselves or finding an attorney after the administration cut funding for Know Your Rights programs. In January of 2021, which was MLK Day, Trump's 1776 Commission issued a report calling for patriotic education, comparing progressivism to fascism, and justifying the nation's founding on the basis of slavery. In the 70s, Trump and his father were sued by the federal government for discriminating against Black individuals seeking an apartment under their real estate company. Students and their families suffering from discrimination at school now have fewer protections after the administration paused Office of Civil Rights investigations. The administration eliminated over $1 billion in food assistance for school lunches and food banks in food insecure school districts across the U.S. Certain words and terms were banned for use by the government or in research, which is directly contradictory to everything that the First Amendment stands for. People mistreated by police officers now have fewer places to report misconduct after the administration rescinded a Biden-era executive order that mandated a national federal registry of police officer misconduct and violence, which was designed to prevent police departments from rehiring abusive officers. He appointed judges to the Supreme Court solely to overturn Roe v. Wade. He raped E. Jean Carroll and was held civilly liable for it in court, which, in my opinion, there is no action that displays more contempt for someone's human rights than sexually assaulting them. The administration froze or cut funding for Title X, which is the only federal program dedicated to providing family planning and preventive health services. This led to a bunch of clinic closures and reduced access to contraceptions, cancer screening, STI testing, and other vital services. They refused to defend the Emergency Medical Treatment and Labor Act against state abortion bans, giving hospitals and states with restrictive abortion laws a green light to deny life-saving abortion care in emergencies. The DOJ announced it would no longer enforce the Freedom of Access to Clinic Entrances Act, which made it illegal to harass or threaten people seeking reproductive care. The Department of Education rolled back protections for sexual assault survivors on college campuses. The administration canceled grants for teen pregnancy prevention programs in 39 states, eliminating critical support for young people, especially in high poverty and minority communities. Trump supported the SAVE Act, which would have disqualified millions of married women who changed their last names from voting. In November of 2019, the Social Security Administration published in the Federal Register a proposal to slash Social Security disability benefits, which could cut benefits for up to 2.6 million people with disabilities. In November of 2020, the Social Security Administration finalized a rule that could make it more difficult for people who apply for disability benefits to appeal denials by allowing agency attorneys to hear appeals rather than impartial and independent administrative law judges. In October of 2017, DeVos rescinded 72 guidance documents outlining the rights of students with disabilities. The DOJ also rescinded 11 guidance documents related to the ADA, which provided businesses with recommendations on how to increase accessibility for their facilities. The administration revoked federal regulations and guidances that interpreted civil rights laws to include protections for sexual orientation and gender identity. The Department of Health and Human Services eliminated non-discrimination protections of LGBTQ people established under the ACA, which made it easier for healthcare providers to refuse services to LGBTQ individuals. Trump signed his executive order that restricts federal recognition of gender to male and female only, which disregards the objective existence of intersex people and invalidates non-binary identity. Trump's DOJ has filed several briefs with SCOTUS that argues that organizations, government agencies, employers, etc., should be allowed to discriminate against LGBTQ individuals. In February of 2017, the DOJ and the Department of Education jointly rescinded Title IX guidance clarifying protections under the law for the transgender students. In May of 2019, the Department of Housing and Urban Development proposed changing the Obama-era equal access rule to allow homeless shelters to deny access based on a person's gender identity. In March of 2017, Trump rescinded the Fair Pay and Safe Workplaces executive order by Obama. Trump's anti-union appointees to the National Labor Relations Board made several rulings that made it harder for unions to organize and advocate for their rights. His administration reclassified thousands of federal workers under Schedule F, which stripped them of certain civil service protections. He reduced the number of OSHA inspectors, which caused a statistical rise in workplace deaths and injuries. He signed an executive order canceling collective bargaining agreements for over 1 million federal workers. In February, Trump's acting general counsel rescinded 29 prior counsel memoranda, effectively making stay or pay agreements legal again, removed the restriction on employers having fired workers sign gag orders, and a bunch of other anti-worker shit. His administration fired a bunch of key workers at the NLRB and EEOC, leaving those agencies unable to enforce anti-discrimination protections. In January of 2019, the Department of Health and Human Services granted a waiver to South Carolina to allow state-licensed child welfare agencies to discriminate in accordance with religious beliefs. He's opposed and threatened the ACI on multiple occasions, including in June 2020 when they filed a brief with the U.S. Supreme Court arguing that the entire Affordable Care Act should be invalidated. In executive order, he also rescinded rules that expanded ACA enrollment periods and increased outreach funding, which reduced access to ACA coverage, especially for low-income and vulnerable populations. And as I'm sure we're all aware, his BBB includes cuts to Medicaid and food stamps. If you've made it to this far, I'm super flattered, and I'm glad that you decided to stick around and educate yourself on these things. Of course, some people don't consider a lot of these to be rights violations, but I think there's at least a few undeniable ones in here that should still prove the point. You'll also notice a pattern in quite a few of these that are clearly counterproductive to the values touted by the right, like reducing education around contraception or removing legal pathways of immigration. And it's really not surprising, but it is worthy of note that a lot of the right's actions expose how disingenuine they are when they claim to care about unborn babies or shit like that. Thank you so much if you made it this far. I'm giving you a big kiss, except I'm a minor, so if you're an adult, please dodge the kiss. Thank you.